My friends, we live in a world of noise, endless voices speaking, debating, demanding attention. Yet, in the midst of all this, there is a quiet, invisible force that moves the very foundations of reality: prayer. Now, some will say that prayer is nothing more than words spoken into the void, a mere exercise of the imagination. Others treat it as a cosmic vending machine, where the right words produce the right results. Both, I think, have missed something essential. Prayer is neither an illusion nor a transaction. It is an engagement with the greatest reality of all. Prayer is often misunderstood. Some see it as nothing more than a comforting illusion, a habit passed down through generations but lacking any real substance. Others treat it as a mere ritual, something to be done out of obligation rather than conviction. And then there are those who view prayer as a mechanism, a sort of divine request system where the right words and the right posture will guarantee a desired outcome. But none of these fully capture what prayer truly is. At its heart, prayer is not an illusion, nor an empty tradition, nor a formula for getting what we want. Rather, it is an engagement with reality itself, a stepping into the presence of the one who made all things. To understand this, we must first recognize that reality is far more than what we see with our eyes. The modern world often limits reality to the physical, the measurable, the tangible. We trust in what we can observe, what can be recorded and analyzed. Yet, even in the realm of human relationships, we know that the deepest realities are not always visible. Love, loyalty, grief, and hope, these things are real, and yet they cannot be weighed or measured. They exist beyond the reach of microscopes and equations, yet no one would argue that they are mere illusions. If such things are real, how much more so the one who made them? Prayer, then, is not the act of speaking into a void, hoping that perhaps against all odds someone is listening. No, prayer is speaking into the deepest reality, the foundation upon which all things rest. It is an acknowledgement that we are not self-sufficient, that we did not create ourselves, and that there is one who stands outside of time and space, who hears and responds. Those who dismiss prayer as wishful thinking often assume that reality is limited to what they can grasp with their own senses. But what if reality is far greater than we can comprehend? What if beyond the visible world, there is a greater reality in which the one who spoke the stars into being listens to the quietest whisper of a sincere heart? If this is true, then prayer is the most natural response to reality, not an escape from it. A man who has lived his whole life in darkness might scoff at the idea of light, assuming it to be a myth invented by those desperate for something beyond their shadowed existence. But the problem is not that light does not exist. The problem is that he has never stepped outside to see it. So it is with prayer. Those who say it is an illusion may simply be those who have never truly entered into it. Consider a conversation between two friends. When one speaks, he does not doubt that the other is listening. He does not first demand proof of his friend's existence before beginning to speak. He simply talks, because the relationship has already been established. Prayer is no different. We do not begin by proving God's existence, nor by demanding visible confirmation that our words have been heard. We begin with the reality that He is, that He knows, and that He listens. To pray is to step into the truth of that relationship, to acknowledge what is already real, even if we do not yet see its full dimensions. This is why prayer is not a mere ritual, but an act of deep engagement. When we pray, we are not pretending. We are aligning ourselves with the truest reality of all. Just as a plant turns toward the sun because it was made to seek light, so the human soul turns toward God in prayer because it was made for Him. When we fail to pray, it is not because prayer is unnecessary, but because we have allowed ourselves to be distracted from what is most real. It is worth considering why prayer has persisted across cultures and centuries. If it were nothing more than superstition, surely it would have faded as human knowledge advanced, yet the opposite has happened. Even in a world filled with technology, science, and endless distractions, people still pray. Why? Because deep within us, we know that we are not the center of the universe. We sense that there is something greater, something beyond ourselves, and in moments of need, joy, or wonder, we instinctively reach beyond the limits of what we can see. Even those who claim not to believe in God often find themselves calling out to something in moments of desperation. The secret power of prayer is not in the words we choose, nor in the rituals we follow, but in the fact that it connects us to the deepest truth of all, that we are not alone, that we are heard, and that the one who listens is greater than all our fears. This is not a comforting illusion, but the most profound reality there is. The power of prayer is not found in the words we speak, nor in the length or eloquence of our petitions. It does not reside in carefully constructed phrases or dramatic expressions of faith. If it did, then prayer would be nothing more than a performance, an effort to impress or persuade. But true prayer is not about how well we speak. It is about the one who listens. The effectiveness of prayer is not determined by our ability to articulate our needs, but by the reality of the God who hears. Many people approach prayer as though it were a transaction, believing that if they say the right words or adopt the right posture, they will receive exactly what they ask for. Others treat prayer as a test of faith, assuming that if they do not get what they desire, it must mean they did not pray hard enough or believe strongly enough. But this way of thinking misunderstands the nature of prayer entirely. If God were merely a distant ruler who needed to be convinced to act, or an impersonal force that required the right formula to unlock its power, then prayer would indeed be about our effort. But if God is a loving Father, then the power of prayer comes not from us, but from Him. Consider the way a child speaks to a parent. The child does not come with well-rehearsed arguments or carefully structured requests. He does not worry about using the right tone or making sure his words are properly arranged. He simply speaks, trusting that he is heard, not because he has spoken perfectly, but because his Father loves him. In the same way, prayer is not about our ability to convince God to act, but about resting in the assurance that He already cares. There is great freedom in this understanding. It means that we do not need to approach prayer with anxiety, fearing that we must say exactly the right thing in order to be heard. We do not have to strain to impress God with our faith or our persistence. Instead, we can come as we are, whether in eloquence or in brokenness, in confidence or in uncertainty, knowing that He hears us because He is good, not because we are worthy. This also means that unanswered prayers are not necessarily failures. If the power of prayer depended on our ability to persuade God, then every unanswered prayer would be a sign that we had not tried hard enough. But if prayer is about relationship rather than transaction, then unanswered prayers are not evidence that we have failed, but that God, in His wisdom, knows what is best. A loving father does not give his child everything he asks for, not because he does not love him, but because he sees more than the child does. What seems like a denial may, in reality, be a deeper kindness. At times, people struggle with prayer because they feel their words are too weak, their faith too small. They imagine that God listens only to those who are strong in spirit, those who pray with confidence and conviction. But this is not true. The power of prayer does not rest on our strength, but on God's. He does not hear us because we are worthy, but because He is merciful. Even the faintest cry, the weakest whisper is heard. Even the prayer of one who doubts, who hesitates, who does not know how to begin, this too is received. Prayer, then, is not something we must perfect before we can use it. It is not a skill to be mastered, but a relationship to be lived. There is no special formula, no secret technique that makes one person's prayer more effective than another's. The simplest prayer, spoken in sincerity, carries more weight than the most eloquent speech recited without heart. In the end, the true power of prayer is not found in us at all. It does not depend on our words, our effort, or our ability to pray correctly. It depends entirely on God, on His love, His wisdom, and His desire to draw us near. This is why prayer is not an obligation nor a burden, but a gift. We are not summoning a reluctant deity or performing a religious duty. We are stepping into a conversation with the one who already knows us, already loves us, and is already listening. Prayer is not merely an exercise in asking for things. It is not a ritual performed to fulfill a duty, nor a way to influence an unmovable force. Rather, prayer is about drawing near to God, about stepping into a relationship that changes us from the inside out. Many approach prayer as a way to change their circumstances, but its deeper purpose is to change us. It is not simply a tool for securing what we desire, but a process by which our hearts are shaped and aligned with the heart of God. When a person prays, something unseen yet profoundly real takes place. They are not just speaking words into the silence. They are placing themselves before. Many people resist prayer not because they doubt its power, but because they fear it might be real. It is one thing to dismiss prayer as an outdated superstition, a comforting habit for the weak-minded. It is quite another to consider the possibility that when we pray, someone is actually listening. If that is true, then prayer is not just a private exercise or an emotional outlet. It is an encounter with a living, personal God. And if that is the case, then we are not the highest authority in our own lives. This is an unsettling thought for many. Human nature prefers control, the sense that we are the masters of our own fate. We like to believe that we determine our own destinies, that we owe no account to anyone but ourselves. But the act of prayer challenges this illusion. To pray is to admit that we are not self-sufficient, that we do not have all the answers, and that we are dependent on someone beyond ourselves. It is a moment of surrender, an acknowledgement that we are not the ultimate authority. And that, for some, is a deeply uncomfortable realization. There is a strange contradiction in the way many people think about God. They reject the idea of a personal God who listens and responds, yet they speak of fate, luck, or the universe guiding their way. They resist the idea that God has authority over their lives, yet they hope that some unseen force is working things out in their favor. It is as if they instinctively sense that there is something beyond themselves, yet they are reluctant to name it. Perhaps they fear that if they do, they will be held accountable to it. To acknowledge that God listens when we pray is to acknowledge that He is real, that He is present, and that He has a will of His own. This is what makes prayer so powerful, but also what makes it so challenging. If God hears, then He is not a distant, indifferent force, but a being with thoughts, desires, and purposes that may not always align with our own. If He listens, then He may also speak, and if He speaks, then we may have to listen. Many people avoid prayer because they suspect that if they truly opened themselves up to God, they might not hear what they want to hear. They might be called to let go of things they would rather hold on to. They might be asked to take a path they did not plan to take. They might discover that the life they have built for themselves is not the life they were meant to live. The fear is not that prayer will be ineffective, but that it will be far too effective, that God will show up and demand more of them than they are willing to give. This fear is understandable. It is difficult to surrender control, to place one's life in the hands of another. But what many fail to realize is that to resist prayer is not to maintain control. It is to cut ourselves off from the very source of life and meaning. A man who refuses to acknowledge the existence of light does not change the reality of the sun. He only ensures that he remains in darkness. So it is with God. To refuse to pray because we fear the consequences does not change the fact that He is there. It only leaves us disconnected from the one who knows us better than we know ourselves. Ironically, the thing that people fear most about prayer, the possibility that God might actually respond, is the very thing that makes it so powerful. If prayer were merely a psychological exercise, a way of ordering our thoughts or soothing our anxieties, it would have little lasting impact. But if it is a real conversation with a real God, then it has the power to transform everything. It means that we are not alone in the universe, that our lives are not accidents, and that there is a purpose greater than our own desires. It means that the struggles we face are not meaningless, that our hopes and fears matter, and that we are seen and known. There is a choice to be made. We can live as though we are the sole authors of our existence, refusing to pray because we do not want to relinquish control, or we can open ourselves to the possibility that we were made for more, that prayer is not an empty ritual, but an invitation to know the one who made us. Yes, it may change us in ways we do not expect. Yes, it may lead us where we did not plan to go, but in the end, to pray is not to lose ourselves. It is to find ourselves in the presence of the one who has been calling us all along. Prayer is often misunderstood as a way of informing God of what he already knows, as if we must bring our needs and desires to his attention so that he may act. But this is not the nature of prayer at all. God, being infinite in wisdom, already knows the thoughts of our hearts before we ever speak them. He knows our struggles, our fears, and our desires. He knows what we will ask before we even form the words. Why then should we pray if God already knows? What is the point? The answer lies in understanding that prayer is not about transferring information to God, but about drawing ourselves into alignment with him. It is not a process of making God aware of our needs, but a process of making ourselves aware of his presence. Just as a child does not speak to his parents only to convey facts, but to share, to connect, and to receive guidance, so too does prayer function in the life of the believer. It is an act of communion, not just communication. One might ask, if prayer does not change God's mind, what does it do? This question assumes that the primary purpose of prayer is to alter external circumstances, but more often prayer alters us. It shapes our hearts, redirects our desires, and aligns our will with the will of God. We do not pray to change God's plans. We pray so that his plans might change us. Consider a man who spends time each morning gazing into a mirror. He does not do this to change the mirror, nor to alter the reflection by sheer force of will. Rather, he looks so that he may see himself clearly. He adjusts his appearance accordingly, fixing what is out of place. Prayer functions in much the same way. It is not about adjusting God to fit our will. It is about adjusting ourselves to fit his. When we pray, we step into the light of divine truth, and in that light, we begin to see ourselves as we truly are. Our weaknesses are exposed, our illusions are stripped away, and we come face to face with reality. This is why prayer is an act of humility. It requires us to admit that we do not have all the answers, that we are not in control, and that we are in need of guidance. It pulls us out of the narrow confines of our own understanding and reminds us that there is a higher wisdom at work. To pray is to acknowledge that we are not the masters of our fate, that we do not see the full picture, and that we must trust in one who does. And yet prayer is not merely about self-reflection. It is also about relationship. Just as two friends who know each other well still speak daily, not to exchange new information, but to deepen their bond, so too is prayer an ongoing dialogue between the human soul and its creator. We pray not to tell God things he does not know, but to grow closer to him, to rest in his presence, and to learn to trust him more fully. This is why even those who struggle with doubt find themselves drawn to prayer in moments of crisis. It is as if the soul instinctively knows where to turn when all else fails. Even those who claim not to believe in God have been known to cry out to him in moments of desperation. This is not irrationality, it is the deepest part of human nature, recognizing its need for something beyond itself. Prayer is woven into the fabric of who we are. At times, prayer may feel like a one-sided conversation. We may not always hear an immediate response or see an instant change in our circumstances, but this does not mean that nothing is happening. Just as a seed once planted does not sprout overnight but grows unseen beneath the soil, so too does prayer work in ways we do not always perceive. It changes us slowly, steadily, preparing us for things we cannot yet see. In the end, the value of prayer is not in the answers we receive, but in the transformation that takes place within us. When we pray, we are reminded of who we are and, more importantly, of who God is. We are drawn away from self-reliance and into trust. We are lifted out of our own narrow concerns and invited into a greater story. Prayer is not about giving God information, but about giving Him our hearts. And in doing so, we find that He has been waiting for us all along. One of the most mysterious aspects of prayer is that it has power, even when the answers are not what we expect. Many people approach prayer with the assumption that its primary purpose is to secure the outcome they desire. They see it as a means of influencing circumstances, of persuading God to act in a particular way. And when their prayers seem to go unanswered, they grow discouraged, concluding either that prayer does not work or that God is not listening. But this understanding of prayer is far too small. The true power of prayer is not found merely in receiving what we ask for, but in the deeper work it does in our hearts, in the way it changes us even when our circumstances remain the same. If prayer were only about getting what we want, it would reduce God to a mere dispenser of blessings, a force to be manipulated rather than a person to be known. But God is not a distant, impersonal being who grants wishes like a genie. He is a loving father who knows what is best for his children, even when they do not. And just as a good parent does not grant every request a child makes, not because of lack of love, but because of greater wisdom, so too does God sometimes answer our prayers in ways we do not expect or immediately understand. There are times when we ask for something earnestly, believing it to be good, and yet we do not receive it. This can be painful, even bewildering, but prayer is not merely about changing circumstances, it is about changing us. When we pray, we are brought into God's presence, where we begin to see things from His perspective. Our desires, which often seem so urgent and unquestionable, begin to be reshaped. We realize that what we thought we needed may not be what is truly best for us. We come to understand that while we see only the present moment, God sees the whole of our lives, and His wisdom is greater than our own. This is not to say that unanswered prayer is easy to accept. There are times when the silence of God feels overwhelming, when we long for a sign that He hears us, and yet no clear answer comes. In those moments, it is tempting to give up on prayer altogether, but it is precisely in those moments that prayer becomes most powerful. Not because we receive what we ask for, but because we learn to trust even when we do not understand. The greatest faith is not found in those who pray only when they see immediate results, but in those who continue to pray when the answers are hidden, when they must walk by faith rather than by sight. Prayer teaches us patience. It teaches us to wait, to trust, to believe that even when we do not see God working, He is still at work. Many of the greatest transformations in our lives happen not in the moments when everything goes according to plan, but in the seasons of waiting, of longing, of learning to surrender our will to His. And this is perhaps one of the greatest lessons of prayer, that it is not about bending God to our desires, but about being drawn into alignment with His. There are countless stories of people who have prayed for something only to realize years later that the unanswered prayer was itself a blessing. What they once saw as disappointment, they later understood as protection. What they once mourned as a lost opportunity, they later saw as the door that led to something far greater. At the time, they could not see what God was doing, but in hindsight, they recognize His wisdom. This is why prayer requires trust. It requires us to believe that even when we do not understand, God is still good. But what about those prayers that seem to go unanswered in ways that bring deep sorrow? There are times when we pray for healing, for restoration, for deliverance from suffering, and yet the suffering continues. This is one of the greatest mysteries of prayer, one that cannot be answered with simple explanations. And yet, even in these moments, prayer has power. It does not always remove the storm, but it gives us strength to endure it. It does not always change our circumstances, but it changes us. It deepens our faith, it sustains us in our pain, and it reminds us that we are never alone. Prayer is not wasted even when we do not receive what we ask for. It is not ineffective even when we do not see immediate results. Every prayer brings us into the presence of God, and in that presence we are transformed. The true power of prayer is not found in the answers we receive, but in the relationship it builds, the trust it strengthens, and the peace it brings. Prayer is not simply about getting what we want. It is about becoming who we were meant to be.